Walter, what compelled you, or who compelled you to tell? Most of the people on television have made so much money that they can just go off and do nothing. He didn't write this book for money, but he was, and always was in television, one of the best writers. And we don't always associate television with good writing, especially in local news. But you always were a good writer, but you wrote in the short form or perspective. What compelled you to tell your story?
I had, Rick, no idea about writing a book, never had thought about doing it, and of course never had tried to do it. When I retired maybe 5 years ago for the first time.
He's like the Michael Jordan of local television broadcasting.
In my business, retirement is often compulsory. The latest. As the hair gets grayer, the less management wants you to be part of the team. But the first time I retired, I was ready to retire. It was after about 45 years in the business. And I just went off thinking about myself. I had been under so many years of such severe deadlines that I never had a chance to even think about what I was really doing to myself and what I did, for others to know. And the more I just thought about it, the more I kind of took notes about things, and my memory came back, and I went over things that I had done in my career since I was very young. It started in 1963, and as I continued to write my notes, I felt that maybe try putting it into a book. My book is not a look like yours is, or others, Royko, for example, or Len O'Connor. It's not a look at Chicago politics. It's an inside story about my 50 years in the business, and I would describe it, Rick, just as a cathartic experience that turned into print.
One of the distinguishing things about this book is it is very sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued about the changes in the business of news. You do not pull any punches here, Walter. Explain to these people who will buy your book in roughly 40 minutes. Those changes have not been for the best, have they?
No, well, they've gone up and down.
Yeah.
There have been times when the changes have been positive, technically, of course, very positive. The things that are done in television news now are not things that we were even dreaming of doing back then. But things then, on the other hand, I don't want to be too critical because it's been my life for 50 years, but I do have some strong feelings about how television news, particularly local television news, focuses too much on the sad side of stories. And every night, when you turn on the news at 10 o'clock and you see another drive-by shooting, it gets kind of tiresome for a while and doesn't make a point. And we don't have time in television, at least that's what I've been told throughout my career. You cannot take the time to tell a story that ought to be told in any kind of depth. That's the serious change. Too much sex and Hollywood stars and famous people who come through town. I mean, most people these days, I would guess, turn on television and get what the weather is, because they're not getting any substantive information, the weather and the sports stores. That part of it to me is very sad, and I see that getting even worse.
Drawing both of you into this thing, it occurs to me that most of us who watch television and pay attention to Chicago politics, that the people in Chicago politics are in the main mostly defined by the images that are projected through television. No one I know, and I doubt if any of you read the 700 pages of the parking contract. Yes? No?
I have.
So I bet you have. But is that true, Keith? I mean, the image of Richard M. Daley is to my mind, a video image.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And Walter has a great little story in his book about when he asked Daley to do sort of an exclusive, and Daley took you out in his car, and you put a camera on the front of the car and sort of toured through the city, and then Daley talked about his views in neighborhoods. And I think the reason, your point is he agreed to do that because he wanted the pictures on TV.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think pictures can be very, very powerful. And I think some politicians, such as Daley, are pretty skillful about what image they project on TV.
About managing the media
their
and
image.
managing the image.
So one of the things I think is interesting about Rich Daley, the second mayor Daley, is he actually in his career became less smooth about talking in public, and I think he did it on purpose. I've actually seen videos of him when he was state's attorney back in the 1980s, and he's giving speeches, and they're actually very good speeches. They're very thoughtful. He's quite eloquent. And then you see some pictures of him later in his mayoral career where he's quite ineloquent. And I think it was like a little bit of a shtick. You know, if someone asks you a really tough question and you give them like sort of a answer, then your feet aren't held to the fire. And so I think he actually, in a very savvy way, sort of in public, portrayed himself as being less smart and tough-minded than he was in private.
What do you think about that, Walter?
As a journalist, you have to learn a few tricks of how to get somebody like Daley, who is really a rather shy guy and not very interested in talking to the media, not trusting of the media, as his father was, not trusting as well. So we have to learn how to guide them into a situation in a way that will let him think, that will give his side of the story. When I called to ask if I could ride around town with Rich, I was told absolutely not. And then when I said, but he has everything to gain because, as you say, the image was there. If I don't use the time to nail him, well, get him in the car, and then I can worry about nailing him once he's in and can't get out. So my approach was, look, I haven't seen you on television talking about your neighborhoods. You always talk about your neighborhoods. That's what's important to you. So write about it, and I'll let you talk about them any way you want. And I should say, it's really important for a reporter to always understand that the idea is not to write or get on television something about the reporter or even how the reporter does it, but give the guy a chance to talk. For better or for worse. Let him say whatever he wants to say. In all my interviews over my years, like John Wayne Gacy, for example, go to death row and talk to the man. He wants to say he's in it. Well, innocent. I don't really care about what he says. I want to hear what he thinks about what he is going to say. And that's what we apply to getting interviews with the mayor. The same with Rahm, although he's the most difficult.
Keith, we'll get to Rahm shortly. Keith, you offered Richard M. Daley the chance to speak on the record about his life and career, and he turned you down. That on some level, that's disappointment. It couldn't be a surprise to you, was it?
No, it couldn't. It wasn't a surprise. I hoped he would chat with me, but when you think it through, I do think he's a very savvy man and a very savvy politician. Sort of Richard Nixon used to talk, sort of about plausible deniability. I mean, there was just no upside in him talking to me. So if he would have talked to me and then I wrote a book that he didn't like, then it would be sort of hard for him to say, well, I don't like his book. Whereas if I wrote a book he didn't like and he never talked to me, he could say, well, I don't even know the guy. I never talked to him. I don't like his book. So I think he wanted to reserve the right to say he didn't like the book.
What's he said?
He said nothing publicly.
Well, what do you hear? Because you do have some private sources. You interviewed about 140 people for this book. What do you hear?
Yeah, I've heard nothing official. Unofficially, folks that know the Daleys quite well, close friends of theirs, have come to talks like this and have bought my book and asked me to sign it. So no one's throwing eggs at me. So that's good.
Has anybody asked you to sign it to Rich?
No, they have not.
If any of you have an entree to Rich Daley, think about that. Walter, compare because this is a rare opportunity for you people to compare father and son here for me.
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I think that basically they are incomparable. Their motivations, their visions were entirely different. And the times were so different. I mean, the father wanted and needed to control everything from the processes of government to the workings inside the Democratic Party. The son understood that led to a lot of really bad publicity for the older guy and took a step away from the inner workings of the Democratic Party. He was never chairman of the party, for example. His dad was. Rich Daley, the young one, didn't do as much politics, as you know, of course, that the older one did. But in terms of expressing themselves, I think there was some similarity. In terms of their love for the city, and I really believe it, they were the same. They really did care. Both of them really cared. They were not as interested simultaneously or comparatively in how the